Hey everybody. So I figured I'd start off this series reading through the notes that I've taken over the years and trying to organize my thoughts in such a way that I have a platform to build on. Now, I first got an idea to do this watching Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House. Through his speeches, I gleaned an immense amount of wisdom. Unfortunately, he suffered a stroke, and it seems like a great deal of his intellect was obfuscated behind improperly meshing gears. Still a very lovely man, still a very talented and intelligent person. But at the end of the day, the torch must stay lit. And even though that I'm not a Marxist in any way, shape, or form, I personally don't even believe Marx was a real person. And that Marxism as a 120, 130-year-old project is seemingly reaching its close, with its apex being in the 50s and 40s. The cult of the skull, 15,000 years ago, was irrelevant. Marxism, 100 years ago, was irrelevant. But I really don't see its relevance today, because the deep truths of humanity don't mesh with Marxist philosophy. The deep truths, the archetypal truths that are written in the stars that we project on, that are part of the smallest and the largest entities. Those aren't addressed by Marxists, and their very small conceptualization of history. And so, if anybody joins this thinking that I'll have the exact same opinions as Matt Chrisman, well, sorry. So, what did I like about the man when he spoke? Well, he had a deep, deep, deep empathetic understanding of suffering because he had Jean-Luc Picard syndrome. No, he had Brown-Séquard syndrome, which is a terrible nerve malfunction when he had a spinal injury when he was in college or high school. I can't remember exactly when he was young. His spine basically exploded out of a random event, which can happen. It's a little scary, but there's probably things that he didn't notice corresponding to that. But it just happened, and so he has to live with it. He was confined to a wheelchair for a period of time, and then eventually learned how to walk, kind of dragging. One side, from what I remember, there was one of his sides is weaker, but it doesn't hurt. I'm not the expert to ask about this, but it feels like one of his legs is immersed in an ice bank and burning at all the times. And I actually personally empathize with that an immense amount because my father had a spinal injury from a car accident. He also has neuropathy. Not as bad as Brown-Séquard syndrome, but still quite taxing. And, interestingly enough, as somebody who proclaims to be a Marxist, he actually had a deep understanding of Buddhism, a good conceptualization of Christianity, and a decent grasp of historical theology. So, the role that religion has played throughout history, which is something that Marxists usually don't bother addressing at all. They think that somehow people have, with the invention of the combustion engine, evolved out of the need for such things as the symbols in their dreams to make sense. Now, sorry if I find that laughable, but it is laughable. I'm a huge fan of Marie-Louise von France and her teacher, Carl Gustav Jung. I believe that Sigmund Freud is one of the worst men to ever exist, that he was a pedophile apologist, that his doctrine is flawed, that his son convinced Woodrow Wilson, the US president, to enter World War I despite the fact that it did nothing but harm. Truly one of the monsters of history. Freud and his family. Not to put down the innocent people in his family, but they have done more damage than many families. Think Rothschild. So, Freud and his crying and his moaning and his sexual obsession destroyed multiple generations of men and poked a hole in Christendom pretty severely. However, if you want to be honest, you can trace it back to Augustine. Augustine introduced into Christendom, after the Council of Nicaea, the doctrines of predestination, which would later move into Calvinism, Genevan Calvinism, and its philosophy of the shining city on a hill, and white purity, which will come in later if we examine the philosophy and politics of North America, and infant baptism, which Martin Luther would have a very bad problem grasping. See, he was an Augustinian monk. He trained Augustinian theology, and he recited Augustinian theology. And so, when he heard that Augustine said the babies that were not baptized were crawling around on the floors of hell, and then he commissioned Erasmus of Rotterdam, the Dutch polymath and linguist, to translate a copy of the Greek New Testament into German. What he found was no infant baptism. And so Martin Luther was right. Saint Martin Luther, maybe. And Augustine was wrong. He was a degenerate in his life, and he harmed Christianity more than any individual person ever did. And predetermination, which is an Old Testament theology that aligns with angels not having free will, and so the fallen angels fell because of God's plans. This is a dualistic great architect monotheism. So it's not perfect monotheism, but it's a dualism where the two light and dark elements of God are attached in a mirror, like Zoroastrianism. And it basically says that the bad is there specifically to orientate you, in comparison to the good. I don't personally believe that to be the case. I believe that the focal point of the Big Bang, and the one that has created things in such a way that they mesh together in such a way, but no other. So there's a proper way of doing things. There's a proper law of gravity, of thermodynamics, of time, and those things are all stacked by the grand architect. But then you see all the chaos that comes out of free will, humans grasping the knowledge of free will and consuming it, which could have been psilocybin mushrooms. I don't know. It's not for me to decide, and it doesn't really matter what it was. But what it did was create extremely large craniums, causing difficulty during birth that no other animal has, except for maybe hyenas. And it caused us to be too smart for our own good. And I personally believe that Petersonian conceptualization of the reality of the fall from the garden could have likely been Eve, which is diminutive of evil, oddly enough, because she wasn't really evil, was afraid of her baby being eaten by a snake, or by a falcon, or by a dog or a lion of sorts. And that's why the chimera that Mary steps on has all these different types of faces with a serpent's body. It's kind of a hydra sort of thing, you know, dragon, hydra. That is Satan's pre-anthropomorphized personification, because it resembles the enemies of life, the enemies of human life, the enemies of the predator seeking out the baby that has fallen from the tree, or sliding up into the tree, and even pushing that much farther to have Eve try to figure something out to protect her baby. That's the Petersonian conceptualization of it, back when he had higher than 70 IQ. So, you know, it's a shame what they did to that man. It's a shame. And psychiatrists, just like any doctors, are also like police officers in that, yeah, their job description is to protect, serve, help, you know, be on the front lines of creating new solutions to problems. But the system itself, especially in the last 20, 25 years, has reverse engineered all of our various social services against the common person in order to siphon off their potential. It's very, very sad. And the socialists have a little bit of a point when they point stuff like that out. So, however, like, you look at the history of communism and socialism, I'm sorry, you just look at it and it's horrifying. That doesn't mean that, like, socialist governments in Latin America are the same as the NSDAP. That's insane. But look into Chilean politics. Anyways, that's getting off point. The main point is religion has always been a part of, it's always been a way, from the cave stories, it's always been a way of passing knowledge down that people then decode in their own ways. And that telephone game of people decoding the message changes it over time. And so it becomes something different. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have a foundation of truth. You see, that's where people get it twisted. And bring up one of the main topics of what I want to do here on Above the Bell Curve is teach people what the Freemasons are, where they came from, what do they do. Today is Friday the 13th. Happy Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th is the celebration of when the Knights Templar, apostate heretic monsters, demons in human skin. It's a celebration of when they were shuttered. When the Swiss project between Geneva and Constance coalesced after the Gnostics were destroyed, and before the Freemasons had coalesced, and created what was known as the Illuminati, and teamed up with various kings and queens around the realm. Just because they have the definitions of gravity for their building written down doesn't mean that they define the definitions of gravity. And so their disgusting playing of God is just that. It is disgusting. It's a play. And that's why the Freemasons love the theater. That's why most of the CIA that would become the later Freemasonic entity, bunch of theater kids. Because it revolves mostly around fakery, chicanery, fantasy. And I just recently reread a book series that I've really, really loved. I'm in the process of rereading it. A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. And the main bad guy, Count Olaf, is perfect bad guy because he is a Freemasonic pedophile. And it perfectly encapsulates everything we know about these people and what they actually genuinely do and what they have done and will continue to do until people say the buck stops here. And these disgusting Freemasons. I got Freemasonic temples around where I live. I got Shriner temples where I live. These people put disabled children on their backs while they do horrific things and poison people on the offside. It is disgusting. Really, truly, if you are ever considering Freemasonry or anything like that, know that they have been tapped out for 35 years when H.W. Bush, Grand Master Freemason, otherwise known as Moloch, lost to a hick playing a saxophone named Bill Clinton. And Epstein and his Zionist friends got into the United States government officially. Things started to go downhill in Israel in 1978, but officially, during the Clinton administration, policy was being written by Mossad. Freemasons got their lunch ate. Want to know why? Because they weren't as bad. Or, let's just say, they weren't as good at being bad as people who have studied it for longer than they have. You think your 500 years of studying is going to compromise with 5,000 years of studying? No. So, we watch them get their lunch eaten, and I don't bat an eye. Zionists, Freemasons, multiple heads on the same Cerberus. But it's interesting to go over the history of it, and as I make notes for this podcast, I would very much like to go over the history of it because it's quite comical. One big thing that they love to do is they love to kill kings that people love. This really started in the 11th century in England, but it also happened to Mary, Queen of Scots. It also happened to JFK and Abraham Lincoln. Yes, York right of killing of the king. Yes. They love and Bush, naming stuff after his family around Dallas. Oh yeah, we're surely intimidated by you spooks and that sort of behavior. But that shutters that for now. Let's move on to Governor DeSantis. Funny enough, Josh Shapiro, who was looking like Steve Mnuchin just a little while ago, has copped the DeSantis fit. He looks like a DeSantis clone now. Well, I've been under DeSantis for a while, and I think he's a disgrace. From a Celtic perspective, he's presided over a tremendous amount of death. I can see the ground underneath us wherever I drive dissolving whenever there's a strong windstorm because of the death, because of the natural death that will precede more death. So from a Celtic perspective, he's an absolute waste. From a Germanic perspective, he's bought and sold by Israel. And he's also a loser. He got single digits in his home state in the Republican primary. From an Italian perspective, from a Mediterranean, Greco-Roman perspective, he doesn't build anything cool. He probably has made sure that building contractors can skate the laws so that the buildings that they build will fall down very quickly. I definitely don't see anything good. And from a Slavic perspective, he can't even ride a horse. He's no Reagan, that's for sure. No Reagan. Shoot, I don't know why people obsess over Nixon so much when Reagan's right there. Like, he's pretty dang cool. Gotta say that, that president was one of the good ones. Well, until his brain started to leak out of his ears and Moloch, H.W. Bush's vice president, started to take control. That's when things got bad. Otherwise, Reagan was pretty dang good. Like, if you knew the horrors that he fought and beat during his presidency, especially when it came to shuttering the asylums, which were entire institutions based around electroshock therapy, torture, and drugging people to high hell. When he shut those down, he became a hero. I'm sorry. Like, he may have done horrible things, but he also prevented the potential of World War III with Russia. Like, sorry. Nixon ain't got nothing on that. Nixon was bought, sold, manipulated, and then discarded. And that's exactly what happens to these people. Keep that in mind. So, I think this is a good episode for today. I'm a little sick at the moment, but I'll get better for you guys. Take care.